Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing. Getting you killed.
Narrative design has become a huge part of the gaming industry over the last 20 years. A large percentage of people will now not only buy games for the mechanics and the enjoyment that they get from playing them, but also to experience the stories that they tell. This has gotten to the point where now even free-to-play casual games being developed for the iPhone and Android are being made with a story in mind. Over the course of this video, we're going to look at three main things, the first of which is going to be the three main genres that you can separate narrative games into, and the most standout games within each of these genres. We're then going to look at the most famous people within each of these genres and what they've contributed towards the community. And finally, we're going to look at the year 1998 and why it was so influential. Now, the first genre we're going to define as pure story, and by this I mean a game where there isn't really any mechanic available to the player other than experiencing the story. The player doesn't have control over what happens to the character, they don't really have many mechanics available to them other than moving around the world. More than anything, the player is just a bystander in the world, experiencing the story unfold around them. Now, the second type of genre we're going to define as choice of story. Now, this is very similar to pure story with one key difference, and that's that the player's main mechanic is choice. They have the ability to choose and make decisions for their character and what happens to them over the course of the game. Now, the final type of genre we're going to define as supportive story, and this is usually a game that offers the player a lot of mechanics and will have a very engrossing and detailed story that drives gameplay. This is essentially the pure story genre, except just filling it full of mechanics for the player to use. So with all of that in mind, let's start looking at the most standout games from each of these genres, beginning with pure story. In 2012, that game company released Journey, an open-world adventure game with one objective: get to the mountain. Now, its story is a simple but meaningful one. Once the player has made his or her way to the final credit sequence, a list of the PSN users that you encountered along the way is shown to the player before they are given the option to play again. And so after this somewhat unclimactic finish to the game, the player realises that it was actually all about the journey towards the mountain, instead of getting to the mountain itself. The game went on to receive several Game of the Year awards and was recently remastered for the PlayStation 4. One year later, Fullbright released Gone Home, an interactive story adventure game with no objective. The player controls Caitlin, a 21-year-old girl who is returning home to an empty house. The game is somewhat narrated as Caitlin finds various journal entries around the house written by her sister, Samantha.
Dear Katie, so much has changed, even just since you've been away. We moved into this house.
Now, without spoiling the story too much, we can just say that there is much more to the house and the family than meets the eye. The game has sold over 250,000 copies after only being made by 4 people, and went on to receive Polygon's Game of the Year award. The Chinese room were clearly influenced by Gone Home, since their game, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, is very similar, albeit with one key difference, that it takes place in an open world instead of one house. The story begins at the end of the world, and because of this, the player is the only character within this open world. So, by going around the world and uncovering clues and hints, mainly by interacting with various televisions and radios, the player is slowly fed information towards where everybody went and what happened.
Electrical failures all over Tower 6. The light is flowing like liquid. Its sense of purpose is overwhelming. There's something in... Stephen?
The game is considered as a successor to Dear Esther, another story-based adventure game from the Chinese room that almost made our list. Finally, we have The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, another game released this year, and another game very similar to Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, albeit with a little bit of a more sinister storyline.
I hadn't entered Red Creek Valley yet, but already I could feel its darkness reaching out for me.
The player takes control of a paranormal investigator who receives a letter from a 12-year-old Ethan Carter asking him to come and visit Ethan at his hometown. Upon arriving, not only do you find Ethan to not be there, but you find the whole town has been abandoned for over 10 years. As the player explores the open world, they find different things to interact with, which again evoke different parts of the storyline to them, and without ruining too much of that, we can just say it gets pretty dark. Right, so with all of that said, let's move on to the next genre and start looking at the best examples of games which give you more of a choice with the storyline. Released in 1980, Zork is the first ever text-based adventure game. What Zork lacked in graphics and gameplay, it more than made up for with its storytelling and the sophistication of its text input. In 1997, LucasArts released The Curse of Monkey Island, a narrative adventure game that saw the player control Guybrush Threepwood, a wannabe pirate. With the main mechanic being point and click, the player had control over not only where he went and what he did, but also what Guybrush said. The game had an average score of 89 out of 100, with many praising the voiceover work and the humour of the game.
It just occurred to me that mixing medicine and alcohol is a really stupid and possibly lethal thing to do. If I were a real person instead of a lovably inept cartoon character with the potential for a few more sequels, I wouldn't even consider it.
Now there's no game that better defines interactive movie than Heavy Rain. Released in 2010, this interactive story-adventure game saw the player control 4 different characters, each one with a different connection to the infamous Origami Killer, the game's antagonist. The player's decisions and actions throughout the game affected the narrative. Characters could die, actions could lead to different levels, and even different endings. The game sold over 3 million copies, winning multiple Game of the Year awards. IGN famously praised it for having the best story in games.
Where's Jason?
He was here a second ago. I bought him a balloon and I turned around and he just disappeared.
Disappeared? What do you mean disappeared?
Stay here. I'll go get him. I'll be right back.
It's easy to see the similarities between Life is Strange and Heavy Rain. The player is given constant decisions to make, all of which affect not only the gameplay, but also the story. The player controls Max, a 12th grade student who discovers very early on in the game that she has the ability to rewind time. This mechanic goes hand in hand perfectly with the other primary mechanic given to the player, that being that they have the ability to make decisions. The game has already sold over 1 million copies, with the last episode still yet to be released.
I believe Max has taken what you kids call a selfie. A dumb word for a wonderful photographic tradition. And Max has a gift.
So now that we've covered all of those games which give you more choice of your story, let's look at the final genre, games with a supportive story. Now before we look at specific examples, we think it's important to understand how this genre was formed, largely thanks to a wonderful few years of video games during the late 90s. In 1997, we were given Final Fantasy VII, a game that has currently sold over 11 million copies. This was thought as one of the games that made JRPGs popular outside of their home market, and at this year's E3 it was announced that an HD remake of the game was going to be coming out very soon.
The reunion at hand may bring joy, it may bring fear, but let us embrace whatever it brings.
Then came 1998, a year that saw the coming of age for 3 of the most famous game franchises ever. Ocarina of Time is still thought by some people to be one of the greatest games ever made, and to most people it's the game that made Zelda a popular franchise. Given how engrossed the fans became with the storyline, along with the fact that the lead character never actually speaks in-game, should show you how strong the game's storyline and mechanics are. The fact that it spans over decades and universes is something that makes players keep coming back to this franchise time and time again. Then came Metal Gear Solid, a game that made stealth games popular. Considering that 17 years later Metal Gear Solid 5 was released, which continues the same storyline, should show you how deep the characters and environments are in this franchise.
It was frightening to think that with a pull of a trigger I could take someone's life.
It's not like shooting targets in training. In a war, all of mankind's worst emotions, worst traits emerge. It's easy to forget what a sin is in the middle of a battlefield.
And then finally we were given Half-Life, a game that won over 50 Game of the Year awards and still influences first-person shooter games today. So these 4 games were all made popular for one communal reason: their exciting storylines. After the late 90s, it became much more common to see games developed with a story in mind that supported the gameplay. Remember our last genre? So let's look at some examples of these. Portal became an overnight success, thanks mainly to its unique gameplay. It often received more praise than Half-Life 2 and Team Fortress 2, the other 2 games that were also involved in the Orange Box. However, its darkly humorous story was what caught the attention of most fans, and was something that was built upon even further in Portal 2, thanks to the help of British comedian Stephen Merchant.
So I said, yeah, why not? And then I started mentioning to people who were gaming fans that I was doing Portal 2, and they were like, Portal 2, oh my god, this is amazing, what? And I suddenly found out that Portal had this big reputation, and now I was like petrified. I was thinking, what if I blow it? You know, I didn't realise there was this huge anticipation for it.
Okay, don't panic. I can still stop it, not a problem. There's a password, it's fine, I'll just hack it, not a problem. Okay.
As a science fiction action adventure game, Mass Effect quickly generated a large audience. Reviewers loved the combat system and the visuals of the game, but most of the praise was laid heavily on the interactive storytelling.
Nobody would give me a mirror. How bad is it?
Hell, Garrus, you were always ugly. Slap some face paint on there and no one will even notice.
Oh, don't make me laugh. Damn it, my face is barely holding together as it is.
Your save file from the first game carried over to Mass Effect 2, which subsequently also carried over to Mass Effect 3. So this meant that you were playing through your own version of the story from 2007 to 2012. It should show you how much the fans loved this storyline after BioWare were forced to release an alternate ending DLC after the initial climax of Mass Effect 3 was so poorly received by the fans.
How is it that you're never scared?
Who says that I'm not?
Following their success with the Uncharted series, Naughty Dog released The Last of Us, a game that focused on the relationship between the 2 lead characters, Joel and Ellie. Because of this, almost every scene was recorded with real actors being motion capped, which helped create one of the more memorable stories that we have today in games.
You know what? We're shitty people. Joel, it's been that way for a long time.
No, we are survivors.
This is our chance!
It is over, Tess!
The game sold over 1 million copies within the first week of its release, and it ended up winning over 240 Game of the Year awards, with many of the reviewers praising its emotionally driven story. Finally, we have Beyond Two Souls, a game not dissimilar from The Last of Us in respect to its motion capture and the relationships between the lead characters. Quantic Dream, though, went one step further than The Last of Us by enlisting the help of Willem Dafoe and Ellen Page to play the roles of Nathan and Jodie, respectively.
I think that's also what makes it challenging, but also really incredible and like raw.
Everything becomes kind of bare and essential, but also it's sort of disturbing sometimes.
Despite being a game, Two Souls actually premiered at the 2013 Tribeca Film Festival, with the director David Cage stating that all games should be shipped with the element of interactive storytelling. So now that we've covered the games themselves, let's actually look at the people behind the games who created them.
Our goal is always to make a game that can touch people, that is really designed for everybody, so your whole family should be able to play it together, and that brings people closer and really move them in a way.
Genova Chen is a Chinese video game designer. He is the designer of the award-winning games Cloud, Flow, Flower, and Journey, and is the co-founder of that game company. Flower was intended by Chen to primarily to provoke positive emotions in the player. Chen described the game as an interactive poem exploring the tension between urban and nature. Chen designed the game around the idea that the primary purpose of the entertainment products like video games was the feeling that they evoked in the audience. His another game journey was focused on the element of communication and the social interaction in video games with critical acclaim.
Finishing Journey as a game, there's an extreme joy and hope. It makes me feel like I'm connected to something bigger that I couldn't describe.
I guess what is really unique about games is the fact that they put you in the shoes of the main character and that you make choices that will have consequences ultimately.
David Cage is a French musician, writer, and video game designer. He is the founder of the game development studio Quantic Dream. Cage wrote and directed both Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls for PlayStation 3. At British Academy of Film and Television Arts Interactive Entertainment Awards, Quantic Dream won 3 awards for Heavy Rain. Cage stated that games always explore the same things. They are all about being powerful, being the good guys against the bad guys. That is a very tiny part of what can be done. There are so many other stories to tell, so many other emotions to trigger. This is a fantastic new medium.
I wanted to create an emotional journey into the life of someone and really tell the story of Jodie Holmes through 15 years of her life and talk about different themes that the themes usually found in video games. This game is about growing, learning, accepting who you are. It's about death and what's on the other side, and I wanted the player to feel different emotions than the one he usually finds in games.
Game developer Warren Spector described Cage as one of the best storytellers in the business. Cage was the first game developer to receive the Legion of Honor, the highest decoration granted in France. Ron Gilbert is an American video game designer, programmer, and producer best known for his work on several classic LucasArts adventure games, including Maniac Mansion and the first 2 Monkey Island games. As the creator of the Monkey Island series, Gilbert wanted to make the game keeps moving through the adventure, so with the secret of the Monkey Island, player could step off the boat and enter the whole storybook world.
You know, Monkey Island was really about the world. That's where all that started for me, is I wanted to make a game that gave me that same feeling of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. So that started with the world, you know, and then, you know, the character of Guybrush kind of came after that. Then the story was really the third step that came with that.
His games are generally focused on interactive storytelling. Ron Gilbert is noted as being the first game programmer to include cutscenes in his games.